I always thought life on my little farm would be peaceful. The kind of quiet you read about in books but rarely find in real life. The morning sun creeping over the barn roof, the smell of freshly tilled soil, the soft clucking of chickens, it was my perfect escape from the chaos of the city. I even had a little ritual, coffee in my hand, boots covered in dirt, staring at my tomato plants and telling them to grow like they mean it. Silly, I know, but that was my life and I loved it. Of course, peaceful doesn't always mean trouble-free. It started with small things, little letters in the mail with strict HOA notices. Fence too tall, grass too long, a chicken coop that supposedly violated aesthetic standards. At first, I laughed. I mean, seriously, a chicken coop. I imagined some HOA committee sitting in a fluorescent-lit room, sipping overpriced lattes, pointing at a photo of my barn like it was a crime scene. I even joked to my wife that I should send them a thank you card for keeping me entertained. But then the notices got more frequent, more demanding, and somehow their tone turned threatening. One day, I found a letter taped to my gate, no signature, no return address, just a cold, typed warning. Immediate action required or consequences will follow. My stomach sank. That wasn't bureaucratic nagging, that was a warning. And I had a feeling I knew exactly who was behind it. I tried to ignore it. I told myself it was just paper pushing, that the HOA couldn't possibly do anything drastic. I kept walking my property, inspecting the fences, feeding the chickens, talking to my goats as if they were my only audience. They didn't judge, at least. But the unease lingered like a storm cloud hovering over the barn. Something was coming, and it wasn't going to be friendly. The first hint that I might be in real danger came one Tuesday afternoon. I was pulling weeds near the vegetable patch when I saw a dust cloud rising down the dirt road. At first, I thought it was a neighbor on a tractor, but as it got closer, I realized it wasn't a tractor. It was 3 pickup trucks barreling down the lane, windows tinted, engines growling like they were announcing some sort of battle. I froze. My heart skipped a beat. Who the hell could this be? I had about 2 seconds to process it before the front truck screeched to a halt in front of my gate. Men jumped out, wearing black jackets and baseball caps, looking like they'd stepped straight out of a low-budget action movie. Clipboards in hand, expressions locked in a mixture of confidence and menace, they didn't even bother to hide that they were here to intimidate me. One of them gave a casual wave and said, "Afternoon, we're here to inspect your property." "Inspect," I blinked. "Inspect," I repeated like I'd misheard. Sure, come on in." My attempt at casualness fell flat. These weren't inspectors, they were enforcers. I could feel it in the way they moved, the way they scanned the barn and my fences, the way they looked at the goats like they might consider them collateral damage. And then it hit me. This wasn't about chicken coops anymore. This was about intimidation. I realized the letters weren't just warnings, they were a prelude. My perfect little farm, the sanctuary I'd built with my own hands, was suddenly a battleground. And I wasn't going to just stand there and watch it get torn apart. I backed away slowly, trying to hide the panic under a layer of calm. "Well," I said, forcing a smile that probably looked more like a grimace, "welcome to the farm. Can I offer anyone lemonade?" My humor hung in the air, awkward and thin, but I could see it confused them for a fraction of a second. Enough for me to think. Enough for me to know I had to act. Because by sunset that day, I wasn't just defending a property. I was defending my life's work, and I was about to discover just how far the HOA would go, and how far I could go to stop them. I didn't know it yet, but this was just the beginning. The calm was over, and the storm had arrived. The sun was already dipping lower in the sky, casting long shadows across my farm, when I realized the dust cloud from earlier hadn't been a coincidence. Those 3 trucks weren't just rolling down the dirt road, they were rolling toward me, and whatever was inside them wasn't friendly. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. My heart was racing, but I reminded myself, panic doesn't solve anything. Planning does. The first truck skidded to a stop at my gate. The others followed, tires crunching on the gravel like ominous drumbeats. I could see them now, 3 big guys, each with the kind of posture that screams we're used to getting our way. Clipboards, hard eyes, and the casual arrogance of people who think the law is optional. One of them gave me a nod that wasn't friendly, It was the nod of someone who knows they're about to impose their will. "Afternoon," said the one in front, tall, broad-shouldered, with sunglasses that hid his eyes but not the intent behind them. "We're here on behalf of the HOA. We need access to your property." I forced a laugh. "Access? Sure, come on in." Inside, my mind was spinning. These guys weren't inspectors. Inspectors don't carry the kind of confidence that makes chickens scatter and goats bristle. No, this was intimidation. This was the kind of visit where someone expects you to fold before you even realize there's a game being played. I tried to stall, trying to turn the situation into something absurd to buy time. "You know," I said, "my goats have very strict visiting hours. Tuesdays and Thursdays only. Did anyone tell them you were coming?" They didn't laugh, not even a twitch. But I could see the tiniest flicker of confusion, just enough for me to keep talking. "And my scarecrow, he's very territorial. You might want to ask permission before approaching the north field. He's a little dramatic sometimes." One of them muttered something into a walkie-talkie, and I realized then how serious this was. This wasn't a misunderstanding. They were here to intimidate me, and if intimidation didn't work, maybe destruction would. My stomach sank, but I knew the key was to keep my head. Panic would be the bait they'd expect me to swallow. "Look," I said, trying to keep my tone casual, "I get it. HOAs have rules. Fences, grass, chicken coops, the usual. But demolishing anything, that seems a little extreme, doesn't it?" The tall one stepped closer, folding his clipboard under his arm. "Extreme or not, we're authorized to enforce compliance. You can avoid trouble if you cooperate." That was it. That was the line. My property, my life's work, suddenly hanging on the words of three men in dark jackets who thought they could intimidate me. I needed to buy time and figure out my next move. I led them on a slow walk around the farm, pointing out various things with exaggerated casualness. "This is my tomato patch," I said, kneeling down to show them a particularly stubborn plant. "You might not realize it, but it has sentimental value. Planted it the day my dog learned how to sit. Emotional attachment, you know." One of them glanced at me, confused. The others exchanged a look. I could feel their overconfidence beginning to wobble, just slightly, but it was enough. Enough for me to note that they weren't completely prepared for a farmer who wasn't afraid to talk back. By now, the sun was almost gone, and shadows stretched across the farm like long fingers. I realized time was slipping, and I needed a plan. I had to find a way to make them hesitate. One mistake from me, and I could be watching the barn go up in splinters. But one mistake from them, and they'd be stepping into a trap they didn't see coming. I smiled, carefully hiding the adrenaline in my chest. "You boys must be tired," I said lightly. "Demolitions are hard work, huh? Here, have some lemonade." I pointed to a small table I'd set up near the barn. The absurdity of it made me almost laugh out loud. They froze, then glanced at each other. I could almost see the gears turning in their heads. Were they about to be mocked by a farmer? That tiny hesitation was all I needed. It gave me a moment to think, to observe, to start plotting my next move. I didn't know exactly how I would outsmart them yet, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't about to let three thugs sent by the HOA destroy my farm without a fight. As they lingered, unsure whether to grab the lemonade or make a move, I realized something important. The intimidation had started, but I still had a chance to turn this around. And when I did, it wouldn't just be a small victory. It would be a demonstration that you don't mess with someone who knows their rights, who knows their land, and who isn't afraid to fight back. The night was falling, and the first moves in this game of cat and mouse were being played. And I was ready to respond, carefully, patiently, and with a little bit of humor to keep my sanity intact. That night, I sat in my little home office, surrounded by stacks of papers, legal books I'd borrowed from the library, and a laptop that was rapidly heating up from my frantic Googling. I never thought I'd become a pseudo-lawyer on my own farm, but desperate times make strange companions. Every sound from outside, the wind rattling the barn doors, a distant owl, the occasional clatter from the goats, felt magnified. I couldn't stop thinking about the men I'd met earlier. those thugs with clipboards who clearly thought they could waltz in and demolish my farm. I started flipping through local ordinances and HOA bylaws, trying to find anything that would give me an edge. Hours passed, and my notes started to resemble a kind of chaotic roadmap: scribbles, highlighted passages, arrows pointing to obscure legal phrases. I found a clause here, a loophole there. The more I read, the more I realized that the HOA might have overstepped, and if I played my cards right, I could turn their own rules against them. At one point, I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my eyes and muttering to myself. So, if I'm reading this correctly, they can't send unlicensed enforcers onto private property, and any demolition attempt without explicit approval is considered trespassing. That could work. I laughed nervously, realizing that I might actually have a shot at winning this without a single hammer or a single angry confrontation. But the tricky part wasn't finding the loophole, it was figuring out how to use it without tipping off the thugs. If they suspected I had a plan, they could just bulldoze my property before I had a chance to act. That meant I needed a trap, one subtle enough that it looked like business as usual to them, but airtight enough to hold them accountable when the moment came. Humor helped me stay sane. I imagined the thugs sneaking onto the farm, only to realize they'd walked right into my carefully documented legal minefield. Imagine their faces, I said out loud, all tough and menacing, realizing that they're about to be caught on tape for trespassing. Priceless. The goats bleated as if in agreement, and I let myself grin. The plan started to take shape slowly. First, I would document everything, every inch of my property, every interaction, every step the HOA took beyond their authority. Cameras were essential. Then, I'd prepare legal notices in advance, ready to present evidence of trespassing and unauthorized demolition attempts. Finally, I would make sure every trap had a safety net. I couldn't afford a single misstep. By the time I finished drafting my notes and setting up a rough blueprint of the strategy, the sun was creeping up over the horizon. I hadn't slept, but adrenaline had replaced fatigue. I realized something vital. The real power wasn't in trying to outmuscle the HOA's thugs. The real power was in outsmarting them, using the law as my shield, and letting their own arrogance do the rest. I spent the morning reinforcing small things around the farm that might become focal points for confrontation, checking locks, adding discreet signage, and placing my cameras where they wouldn't be noticed, but could catch every move. I even labeled some of the scarecrows with little protected property signs. Absurd, yes, but I knew the image of a farmer standing calmly while his property was protected would weigh more heavily on their conscience than any amount of yelling or threats. Every step I took, every note I made was careful, deliberate. I kept imagining the thugs walking onto my farm, confident and arrogant, only to discover they were completely exposed. That mental image kept me focused, kept me sharp, and kept me from letting fear take over. By the end of the day, I had a plan that felt solid. I didn't yet know how it would play out, but I knew this much. The next time the HOA sent someone to harass me, I wouldn't be waiting to react. I would be ready to lead the dance, to turn the situation on its head, and to make sure the people who thought they could intimidate me were the ones facing consequences. As I sat back, exhausted but strangely exhilarated, I glanced out the window at the barn bathed in the fading light. I whispered to myself, half joking, half serious, "Tomorrow, boys, you're stepping onto my farm, and you have no idea what's waiting for you." I had found the loophole, prepared the plan, and set the trap. The calm before the storm was over. Now, all that was left was to wait for the right moment to strike, and to hope the HOA didn't realize what was coming until it was too late. The morning air on the farm had that crisp, electric feeling, the kind that tells you something big is about to happen. I moved quietly, almost ceremoniously, setting things into place. Every camera angle, every sign, every piece of evidence I had been compiling over the past 2 days was checked, rechecked, and triple-checked. My fingers tingled with anticipation, but I didn't let it show. If the HOA thugs suspected even a hint of preparation, they might change their approach. And that would ruin everything. I started with the cameras. I positioned a small one near the barn, another overlooking the chicken coop, and one that captured the main driveway. They were subtle, blending into the scenery, but perfectly placed to record every inch of what would happen. I even hid a little action camera in a scarecrow's chest. The thought of a giant, grim-faced enforcer being filmed by a stick with straw arms made me chuckle. "They're going to be famous," I muttered. Next came the signs. Nothing flashy, just carefully worded notices about private property, legal restrictions, and explicit warnings that demolition or unauthorized entry would be considered trespassing. I placed them in areas they were almost guaranteed to pass. It was the legal equivalent of leaving breadcrumbs in the forest, guiding them straight into the trap. Then came the paperwork. I stacked it neatly in a folder, ready to be displayed or submitted at the first sign of trouble. Every law, every clause, every loophole I'd discovered over the last 2 days was organized for maximum effect. I wanted it to be crystal clear. If they made a single misstep, I had it all documented. The thought of those thugs realizing they walked into a situation where I could hold them accountable made me grin. While I worked, I kept up a running commentary to myself, partly to ease the tension, partly because humor had always been my secret weapon. "You boys are in for a treat," I muttered, adjusting a sign near the barn. A masterclass in legal wrangling, starring me and this scarecrow. The goats watched me, blinking in mild confusion, but I swear I saw them nod in agreement. By midday, everything was in place. I walked the perimeter one last time, imagining how the confrontation might unfold. The thugs would approach confidently, expecting to intimidate. They would see a calm, unassuming farmer standing there, maybe smiling a little, and think they had the upper hand. Then, when they stepped over certain lines I had carefully defined with my research, they'd be caught in the web I had woven. There was an odd sense of satisfaction in that. Not the sadistic kind, but the one that comes from knowing you're about to outsmart someone who underestimated you. The HOA had assumed fear would make me compliant. They didn't know that fear, for me, was fuel. As the sun started its descent, casting long, dramatic shadows over the farm, I heard the distant hum of engines on the dirt road. My heart rate quickened, but I kept moving slowly, almost lazily, as if I were tending to my usual farm chores. I watered the plants, fed the chickens, and even tossed a carrot to one of the goats. Every action was calculated. I wanted to appear normal, harmless, unprepared, all while knowing the exact moment my trap would spring. I checked the cameras one last time. All systems go. The hidden scarecrow cam was rolling, the driveway cam had a perfect view, and the barn cam captured the entire property line. Even if the thugs tried to act tough, they wouldn't know they were being recorded from angles they couldn't see. By sunset, the tension was almost unbearable. I sat on the porch, sipping my coffee, glancing at the road. I could see the silhouettes of trucks approaching in the distance, kicking up dust that glimmered in the fading light. My palms were clammy, my mind racing, but I forced myself to smile. I wasn't afraid. I was ready. And then I whispered to myself, half serious, half joking, "Step lightly, boys. You're about to find out that a farmer with a little knowledge and a lot of patience can be more dangerous than a demolition crew with sledgehammers." The calm before the storm had ended. Everything was set, every angle considered, every risk accounted for. Tomorrow, the HOA would try to assert power, and tomorrow, they would walk right into the trap I had designed. The suspense was tangible, almost electric, and I could barely contain the thrill of it. It was going to be a long night, but I didn't mind. I had spent 2 days preparing, and now all that was left was to wait and watch. The morning air carried a faint tension, the kind that prickles the skin and makes every sound feel amplified. I could hear the distant rumble of engines before I even saw the trucks, and my heart started that familiar rhythm of adrenaline and anticipation. The moment had finally arrived. The HOA had decided to make their move, and I was ready. Well, as ready as I could be without looking like I had spent 2 days plotting every detail. The first truck crested the hill, its dust cloud announcing their arrival. 2 more followed in perfect formation, like some bizarre demolition parade. I stepped onto the porch, holding my coffee like a weapon of calm, and tried to project the casual composure I had been practicing all night. My goats watched from the fence line, chewing quietly, completely unimpressed. They were my only true audience at this point, and I silently thanked them for their steady presence. As the trucks came to a stop in front of the gate, I noticed the confident postures of the men inside. The kind of confidence that only comes from thinking you hold all the cards. One of them stepped out first, a broad man with a dark jacket and sunglasses that hid any trace of humanity in his eyes. He gave me a curt nod, and I returned it with the kind of faint smile that says, "I see you, and I know what you're up to." "Morning," I said casually, my voice steady, even friendly. "Lovely day for property inspection, isn't it?" He frowned, clearly thrown off by my lack of visible fear. "We're here to ensure compliance with HOA regulations. Step aside and let us assess the property." I nodded, gesturing grandly. "Of course, right this way, I'll show you everything." Inside, my mind was a whirlwind of strategy. Every step I led them through, every corner I showed them was part of the trap. Cameras captured every angle. Signs reminded them, subtly but legally, that they were crossing into private territory. Every moment built the evidence I needed. They followed, walking with the kind of heavy-footed arrogance that always makes people predictable. "So this is your barn?" the tall one asked, sneering as he circled the structure. "You sure it complies with HOA codes?" I laughed softly. "Oh, it's fully compliant with common sense. The chickens insisted on having their space. They're very particular about zoning." My humor hung in the air, awkward but effective. I could see the confusion flicker across their faces, just enough to distract them, just enough to make them underestimate me. The tension was thick, practically tangible. Each step they took across the property was documented by hidden cameras, every word, every gesture caught. I even had a small microphone in my pocket, just in case their threats escalated. The thought of having everything recorded gave me a strange sense of satisfaction. I wasn't just defending my farm, I was building the evidence that would topple their intimidation from within. At one point, the broad man leaned closer, voice low and dangerous. "We can resolve this quickly if you cooperate. Don't make things difficult." I smiled, calm as a summer morning. "Oh, I'm all for efficiency," I said, gesturing toward a clipboard I casually held in my hand. "But I also like to keep things documented, for everyone's protection." The faint implication that I had the law on my side seemed to make them pause, a tiny crack in their armor. I continued guiding them, subtly steering them into areas I had prepared. Signs reminding them of trespassing laws, cameras hidden in plain sight, and even the occasional strategically placed scarecrow, which, in the dim morning light, looked oddly imposing. Humor and tension intertwined as I maintained my calm demeanor, knowing that they had no idea the web I had woven around them. By the time they reached the far edge of the property, I could see the uncertainty creeping into their movements. Their swagger had diminished. Every glance they threw at me carried a flicker of doubt, and that was all I needed. I stepped back onto the porch, sipping my coffee, and thought to myself, this is it. This is the moment when arrogance meets preparation. The HOA had sent their enforcers to intimidate me, to demolish my farm, and yet here they were, unsure, cautious, completely exposed. I had set the trap. They had stepped right into it. The storm had arrived at my doorstep. And now, I was about to show them just how dangerous a prepared, calm, and clever farmer could be. I could see it in their faces, the moment when arrogance collides with reality. The broad man's jaw tightened, and the others glanced around nervously, suddenly aware that the calm, joking farmer standing in front of them wasn't so helpless after all. That's when I decided it was time to act. Slowly, deliberately, I reached for the folder I had been keeping at my side. "Before we go any further," I said, keeping my voice casual, "let's make sure we're all on the same page regarding property laws and HOA regulations." One of them scoffed, "You don't need a lawyer to handle a simple inspection." I smiled, and in that instant, I realized the full power of preparation. "Oh, I think it helps," I said, opening the folder and sliding it toward them. "You see, under Section 15.4 of the HOA agreement, any demolition requires a written court order. An unauthorized entry onto private property constitutes trespassing under local law." Additionally, unlicensed enforcers cannot carry out any punitive action without legal liability falling squarely on the HOA. Their confident expressions faltered. The broad man blinked, as if trying to remember whether he had ever read this section of the law. He hadn't. None of them had. I continued, my tone calm but firm, as though I were reading from a storybook, not threatening three grown men who thought they could intimidate me. In plain English, that means any attempt to destroy my barn, coop, fences, or crops without a proper court order is illegal. And thanks to the cameras and microphones I've set up, we now have proof that you are trespassing, threatening property, and acting without authorization. I could see the weight of the words settling in. One of the men shifted uneasily, glancing at the hidden cameras as if suddenly aware of the documentation they had ignored. I leaned casually on the porch railing, my expression almost friendly, and added, "And don't worry, I recorded everything from the moment you arrived. Every step, every threat, every word is logged. You're all part of a legal record now." There was a tense pause. Then the broad man's voice dropped an octave, frustration and fear bleeding through. You can't do this. This is just an enforcement job." "Oh, I can," I said lightly, tapping the folder. "And the law backs me up. You might want to call your superiors because right now, any action you take could and will land the HOA in serious trouble." At this point, the other two men exchanged looks, clearly questioning whether they had underestimated me. That was when the subtle humor of the situation hit me. Three grown men, sent to demolish a humble farm, frozen because a man with dirt-streaked boots and a smile had read the law and set up a few strategically placed cameras. The absurdity almost made me laugh out loud, but I kept my composure. The broad man stepped back, a flicker of defeat in his eyes. We need to call this in," he muttered. "Yes, I think that's a good idea," I said, gesturing toward the trucks. "And while you're at it, maybe review Section 15.4 and the local trespassing laws. I've included printed copies in the folder for your convenience." Their hesitation was enough. They could see that every move they made was documented, and any aggressive action would be self-incriminating. I had turned their own arrogance into my advantage. The tension in the air was almost cinematic, a mixture of disbelief, fear, and the undeniable satisfaction of a carefully laid plan coming together. As they began retreating toward their trucks, I called after them, keeping my tone light. "Have a nice day. And please, don't forget your paperwork. I'd hate for anyone to get fined for forgetting to carry their own legal liabilities." The trucks drove off, dust kicking up behind them, leaving me standing on the porch with my heart pounding but my spirit triumphant. I took a deep breath, glancing over the farm, which was untouched, intact, and completely mine. My trap had worked. The HOA had been outsmarted without a single fight, without confrontation, and certainly without any demolition. I leaned back, finally allowing myself a grin. "That, my friends," I muttered to the goats, who watched silently from the fence line, "is how you win against people who think they can intimidate you. Calm, prepared, and armed with knowledge." The adrenaline was still there, but it had shifted from fear to satisfaction. The legal trap had sprung perfectly, and I knew one thing for certain. From this day on, the HOA would think twice before sending anyone else to my farm. And for the first time in days, I felt a strange calm settle over the land. After the debacle with the thugs, I thought maybe the HOA had learned their lesson. I was wrong. You see, bureaucracies don't just accept defeat. They sulk, they strategize, and they try every small, petty trick in the book. Over the next few days, subtle signs of their retaliation started showing up, and I had to admit, it was almost comical how determined they were to get under my skin. It began with minor annoyances. A letter here, a notice there. Grass slightly over the recommended length. Fence alignment needs reevaluation. At first, I laughed. Who cares about a half-inch of grass? But there was a pattern, a persistent drip of harassment, and I knew that if I ignored it, it could escalate again. One morning, I found a notice on the barn door claiming that my scarecrow violated aesthetic guidelines. I stared at the straw-filled sentinel and shook my head. "You really are trying too hard," I muttered, imagining a meeting of the HOA committee where someone had probably proposed fining an inanimate object. The goats, of course, gave me blank stares as if to say, "Well, what did you expect?" Then came the more creative attempts. The HOA tried sending inspectors for routine evaluation, but I had anticipated that. Every one of them received the same warm welcome, me standing with a clipboard, calmly explaining property rights, recording everything, and offering them a cup of lemonade. They hesitated, clearly uncomfortable when I mentioned local trespassing laws and the previous incident with the demolition crew. It was frustrating, yes, but also strangely satisfying. Each time they tried to push, I felt the advantage swing further in my favor. They were like children who had been caught stealing cookies, tiptoeing around, afraid of consequences. I couldn't help joking aloud to myself, "Next, they'll fine the chickens for wandering into the cornfield." The tension built as I noticed a more subtle form of retaliation, complaints from neighbors who had been encouraged by the HOA to observe my property. A concerned citizen apparently spotted a chicken outside its pen and filed a report. I read it over my morning coffee and laughed. "It's a chicken, not a criminal," I said, shaking my head. I could almost hear the HOA sweating in their office, realizing how ridiculous their campaign was becoming. One afternoon, a truck rolled slowly down the dirt road. I recognized it instantly as the HOA's surveillance vehicle. My heart rate picked up not from fear but from excitement. They were testing me, trying to see if I'd crack. I stepped outside casually, waved at them, and then returned to the barn, carrying a stack of legal documents and muttering, "Just in case you decide to get creative." The driver gave me a nervous nod and drove on. I could almost see the thought process in their minds. This guy isn't scared, he's prepared. Maybe too prepared. That tiny spark of doubt was all I needed. As the week went on, the HOA escalated to more overt, yet still petty tactics. Letters threatening fines for unsanctioned barn decorations, suggestions to repaint the fence in community-approved colors, and even hints that my chickens were disturbing the neighborhood aesthetics. Each time, I countered methodically, documenting everything, making sure my legal position was airtight. By the end of the week, it became clear. Their attempts at intimidation were failing. I had remained calm, clever, and one step ahead at every turn. Each petty attack was met with a measured response, supported by evidence and legality. Humor became my secret weapon, allowing me to maintain perspective while they fumed in frustration. Sitting on the porch one evening, watching the sun dip behind the barn, I reflected on the past few days. The HOA's retaliation, while annoying, had only reinforced one truth. Knowledge, patience, and preparation can outweigh raw aggression. I had turned their efforts to harass me into a showcase of my own ingenuity. And I realized something else. The farm wasn't just a piece of land anymore. It had become a symbol of persistence, cleverness, and the ability to defend what matters without resorting to anger or reckless action. I took a deep breath, listening to the soft rustle of the trees and the distant clucking of chickens, and smiled. The storm had passed, at least for now. The HOA had tried and failed to break me. My farm remained mine, intact and untouchable. The tension hadn't vanished completely, but it had shifted. The next time the HOA thought about sending enforcers, they would hesitate. They would think twice. And for the first time, I could sit back and enjoy the quiet, knowing I had outsmarted them at every turn. Finally, the morning arrived when the air felt lighter, almost celebratory. After days of tension, letters, petty complaints, and sneaky attempts at intimidation, the HOA had retreated, at least for now. Standing on my porch, coffee in hand, I let the quiet settle over the farm. The chickens clucked contentedly, the goats grazed lazily, and even the scarecrow seemed to stand taller, as if acknowledging our small victory. I thought back to the first letters, the first menacing trucks, and the thugs who had tried to walk across my land with arrogance in their step. It had been nerve-wracking, exhausting, and let's be honest, sometimes absurdly funny. But it had also been a lesson in patience, strategy, and the power of knowing your rights. I smiled, recalling the look on their faces when I opened that folder in front of the demolition crew. The shock, the confusion, the sudden realization that they were no longer the ones in control, it was priceless. I had imagined that moment hundreds of times in my head, but living it, far better than I had even hoped. By mid-morning, I decided it was time for some maintenance around the farm, little tasks to restore normalcy. I mended a fence, checked on the tomato plants, and gave the chickens a little extra feed. Everything felt lighter now. There was no lurking threat, no shadow of intimidation. The farm was mine again, truly and completely. Humor had carried me through, and I let it shine now. I walked past the scarecrow and muttered, "We did it. You and me, buddy." The HOA didn't stand a chance. The goats bleated in apparent agreement. Even the chickens seemed to sense the calm and strutted a little more proudly, as if celebrating alongside me. Over the next few days, the letters stopped. No more complaints about grass length, fence height, or unsanctioned barn decor. I checked my cameras and folders just to be sure, but everything was quiet. The HOA had realized that this farmer wasn't someone to push around, and their attempts at harassment had backfired spectacularly. I could almost hear the committee members muttering in frustration, trying to figure out how a single person had outsmarted them using nothing but knowledge, patience, and careful preparation. Reflecting on the ordeal, I realized something important. This wasn't just about property or regulations, it was about resilience. It was about standing your ground, thinking strategically, and facing bullies with calm confidence rather than anger. Every step I had taken, every note I had made, every camera I had hidden had been part of a bigger plan, to protect what mattered without giving in to fear. I even allowed myself a little self-congratulation. "You know," I said to the goats while fixing a gate latch, "I think I might actually have a talent for this legal farm defense thing. Maybe I should write a book." They stared at me, unamused, but I didn't mind. Humor had been my shield after all. The farm had been tested, and it had passed. My work, my sweat, and my patience had won the day. The thrill of outsmarting the HOA, combined with the satisfaction of seeing my property untouched, created a rare sense of triumph. I could finally breathe without glancing over my shoulder, without imagining trucks rolling down the road with men ready to cause chaos. And while the tension was gone, the lesson remained clear. Knowledge is power. Calmness is strength. And sometimes, the best way to fight bullies isn't with anger or force, it's with strategy, preparation, and a little bit of humor. As the sun set over my farm, bathing the barn in a golden glow, I sipped my coffee and watched the peaceful scene around me. The chickens clucked softly, the goats settled into the shade, and the scarecrow stood vigil over the land, a silent sentinel. I smiled to myself. My farm was safe, my work respected, and my clever little trap had ensured that anyone who tried to threaten it would think twice. And in that quiet, golden moment, I realized something profound. Sometimes victory isn't about fighting the hardest, it's about outsmarting the loudest, staying patient, and never underestimating the power of preparation. The storm had passed. The HOA had been outwitted. And I, a simple farmer with dirt-streaked boots and a few hidden cameras, had proven that brains, patience, and a sense of humor can protect more than brute force ever could. Every HOA has a story on HOA Headaches. You'll hear the ones they tried to bury. Subscribe today.